You're listening to the all-new KBLU radio network. That's the Blue Raven Network. Often duplicated, but never replicated. You're listening to the all-new KBLU radio network. That's the Blue Raven Network.
Often duplicated, never replicated. You're listening to the all-new KBLU radio network, Blue Raven Network.
Well, welcome back to Scott Hensler Network. I'm Scott Hensler. If you've been to my website at scotthensler.org, you'll see that there's a lot of information that's pertaining to those issues that we call paranormal, supernatural. As a deliverance minister, and that's somebody who prays for those that need help from the demonic, having curses broken, and so forth over them, Christian or non-Christian. 99% of who I work with are Christians, in hopes that those who are non-Christian being delivered, that they'll then give their heart to Christ. I don't do very many shows on this network. I'm on Pine Ridge Warriors a lot. I'm going to continue with Brother Marcus and Curtis and Jose on their shows. If you haven't listened to them, the link is on my website at scotthensler.org. If you have any questions, please email me at scott@scotthensler.org. If you need prayer, if you have situations that need attention for deliverance, for cleaning your house, getting the curses broke off you, I'd love to help you. And I'd like to mention, too, for those who have been supporting my ministry, I try and send out my book, Second Heaven Invasion, PDF. If you've given a donation and you didn't receive my book, please email me again to remind me. When it comes in through my service, if whatever email is on there, that's what I send it back to. So if it's kicked back, it doesn't go through and you don't get it. So if you haven't received it, please let me know about that. Now, in a couple of weeks, the condensed version of Second Heaven Invasion, Hoodoo Voodoo, should be in paperback form. The idea behind that condensed form is to focus mainly just on deliverance and breaking curses, and evangelists or those that venture into other countries and deal with witchcraft and shamanism, witch doctors and so forth. This is the book. This is all the information you need to stand against the wiles of the enemy. Now, tonight we're going to venture into a little different program. I've got a gentleman on the line that I've talked to before. We've discussed a great deal of information concerning Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, whatever you want to call this particular creature. He's been doing a great deal of research, and I believe that he's done a very good job at it, and so I'm happy to have him on the show, and we'll get to him in just a minute. I want everyone to understand that what we're going to talk about tonight, this isn't theory, this isn't what if, this isn't hype or the things that Hollywood tries to bring up. these are real situations that have taken place for a very long time. They've come to light since the 60s with some of the videos that have come out. There has been a lot of counterfeit. There's been some fake stuff. But I can assure you that as a deliverance minister, the people that I help out that have encountered these, that have had other situations that are very much like it, are finding out that by themselves, without the blood of Christ, that they're being demonized from the contact, such as the black-eyed children as well as Sasquatch, these situations. And so when anyone ventures into this in the paranormal, and I've talked about this before, like these paranormal investigators, if you were to follow them, I would guarantee that because of what they've done and not having the blood of Christ, not having Ephesians 6:10, 6:11 on them, form or God, that they're in a situation that their lives are upside down, they've become demonized, they're having bad dreams and visitations. So with that, those who are Christians that are investigating this are bringing that information together for us to enlighten us and to bring us into an understanding that as we get closer to the end times, that these sightings are going to increase. They already are. But it also includes hybrids and other types of creatures and even UFO connections, that these are all compiling together for the last days. And so with that, Glenn, I want to make sure that I have your last name correct. Is that Boulier or Boulier?
It's Boulier or Boulier.
Boulier, okay. All right,
yeah.
Well, welcome to the show. I guess I'm just going to turn it over to you for a moment here to tell us about yourself. You contacted me on Facebook, and then we discussed, in detail one day, and I wished I had recorded that because we had covered everything that, what I didn't have, you had, and vice versa. So maybe we can reproduce that today. So go ahead, Glenn. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you. Thanks for having me in this evening, Scott. Well, I'm almost 60 years old. Been married to a lovely German girl for 34 years. We've got 3 boys. And at the moment, I'm employed with the city of Calgary and have been for 34 years.
Fantastic.
Concerning the past, I was born and raised roughly in Prince Edward Island in eastern Canada, and then my father was in the armed forces, and from there we would stretch out and even visit Germany for 2 years, as well as different parts of Canada, of course.
So how long have you been doing this research?
Well, the research has been going on for approximately 14 years seriously, mostly, you could say, under the radar, just for the fact is of how much is going on. I haven't been interested in the mainstream idea of it because of so much involved in that atmosphere of it, and a lot of it has been negative or there's no productivity to it. And it got serious back in the year 2000, actually, when we picked up our first PC. And from there, of course, a person touched on the subject of Sasquatch Bigfoot on the Internet, and I didn't like what I was seeing or witnessing or hearing because of the fact that it ended up that most of it, or almost could be 85% of it, was complete rubbish. So I got quite annoyed with it and started to write about the subject and things based on our encountering the species in Princeton, British Columbia years ago.
Are you pretty much doing this by yourself, or have you associated with other people that you count on as researchers?
Yes, Scott, it's been periodically. There's been individuals behind the scene. They could be researchers, investigators, friends, acquaintances, individuals that have either witnessed such a creature or have known somebody that has witnessed such a species. And as I'd mentioned earlier, is most of it had been kept hush-hush on my end because I'm not a mainstream individual or an investigator that's out there and a common name. I've been and have kept quiet for most of the years, but as I had mentioned, seeing so many things involving this species and what it could be, then I thought I'd better get going on this. So I started seriously about 20 years ago, but writing and investigating it about 14.
Well, I guess from this point we should just try and figure out what in the world these things are. I mean, we're talking about Sasquatches or hybrids of some type. Just what do you think they are?
From observations and actual encountering the species, I would say that we would like to believe that they would be 100% flesh and blood, and that what we saw in the past was that way. It was definitely a flesh and blood creature or forest giant, and showed that kind of activity to it. Things have changed over the years, and the reason why I started to write seriously about this subject was there had been a turning point years ago where it went from a flesh and blood issue and had become paranormal as well as spiritual, a very controversial, very touchy subject. And I've had over the years friends or individuals that have contacted me by a number of means and have asked, and they either have known me or found out and investigated my background, and they wanted to know that if it wasn't an entirely flesh and blood creature, then what is it? And they said, tell us, because you wouldn't lie to us. And over the researching years and the investigative years, I said, well, we are now into a situation or a gray area that has become as such that we're now dealing with a paranormal idea of it, and there's serious issues to that.
Yeah, I can relate to it. And so I wanted to confirm that being a deliverance minister myself, I am a Christian. I believe in the God of the Bible and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. And so, Glenn, I understand, too, from talking to you that you are a Christian as well.
Yes, that's true, Scott. We have an evangelical background, and as we met years ago, it just so happened to be that my wife, Rosemary, was as such here in Calgary, Alberta, and as mentioned, I come from Princeton, British Columbia. The background is that we do believe in all the things of Christianity as well as Bible word for word, and we've just, we've placed that in our lives, and this is how we go about ourselves, eh?
Yes, and I'm sure when you try and talk to other Christians in the church, they probably look at you like you have 2 and 3 heads, like they do me when I discuss deliverance and demons. Have you found that?
I have, sadly, and not to get over, too much into that end of it. A lot of it has become like a secular, liberal 9-to-5 atmosphere, business-wise, or not adopting or adapting to what God's actual beliefs and what Christ's teachings were. It's a lot of watering down, and my idea of it is I'm sort of an aggressive individual for the gospel, believe in it, and take no for an answer. But yet, I try to stay out of a number of issues concerning just that atmosphere of it, the secular idea of it, and where it's all headed.
Yeah, I've found that if it's received, then fine, I'll go, forward with it. If not, I just shake the dust off my feet and move on, because those people that I work with, and when I say that term, I mean in deliverance, there's people waiting in line who need the help, and so I don't bother anymore. The time's running out. I'm curious, when we talk about the Sasquatch or Yeti or whatever you want to call this thing, are there different types? I mean, do we have some that are hairy? Do we have some that are not? Can you elaborate on that?
It is quite widespread. Not so much for what I cover. I'm covering mainly what would be a forest giant, hopefully just an undiscovered species of haired giants. In our case, or our family's case, witnessing these giants over the years, that's all we've seen is haired practically head to toe, and that's what we believe. I've heard through a number of different avenues, even concerning the Native Americans, they have mentioned to me a number of times that there's actually cases where there is a certain type of Sasquatch, Bigfoot giant that is actually cannibalistic or quite dangerous, and people or individuals are to try to stay away from that issue of it. In our particular cases, we never saw such things. We saw practically a creature that was shy, timid, and just wanted to turn and disappear. We never saw any extreme, violent type situations to it at all.
How many people do you think you've interviewed over the years?
On tape, there's only been maybe 3 or 4, and everything else I spent years putting out the word, contacting, leaving messages on forums, you could say corkboards in communities, contacting all levels of society, everyone, just trying to get it in, and then separating thousands and thousands of sheets of information, and then, getting it down to the nitty-gritty of the ones that were legit or that you could, host in such a project, eh?
What about your personal experiences? It hasn't been boring. It's been quite interesting. Let's start with 1974, and we'll start with my particular cases. I've seen something unusual at least 3 times. There was no doubting to what it was or what we hope it is, because in 1974, I was in the years training for football. That was the love of my life then. And I have 2 other younger brothers, and the one brother, Alan, in a morning of April 1974, we hitched up the runners, and we were going to go for what's a short 3-mile run where you start off in Princeton, BC. It's a small little town of about 5,000 people, logging and mining industry at that time. And we hitched up the runners and headed out that morning at about 5:30, I think it was, somewhere in there. And we knew that when the run was over, we called it the circle route, and you ended up where you started off. We headed up across Brown Bridge and went up the gravel road there. And as we finished the run, I forget, was it 45 minutes later, something along that line, we were just on a cool-down period, and we were actually walking at that time, breathing rather heavily, but not saying a word. Just looking up ahead, we had actually measured off the distance over the research and investigative years,
and the sighting was approximately just over 200 feet away, and it was light out. It was just lightly starting to filter to snow because it was April, and I spotted movement coming up off the riverbank and coming onto the roadway in front of us about, I'd say about 175 feet. It only took this, it would be like a black object, only took it about 3 steps to cross a 10-foot lane roadway and then lift itself up onto the gravel road that we jogged up earlier. Put its back immediately to us, and from my viewing it, or my brother and myself viewing it, it hadn't noticed us yet. But my brother, being quite brazen about things, he actually yelled at it and only said one word, like, "Hey." And I kid you not, my life changed that day as this thing turned around and it scanned, it was looking, found us, and then there was about a 20-second standoff of just a visual on both ends. Tilted its head slightly. We calculated that it had just a little bit less hair on the face. You couldn't see the eyes because of the distance, but you could see the eye sockets. You could see just that you couldn't see ears. You couldn't see a neck on the creature. It was haired head to toe. What we saw that morning was an intelligent, what we hoped was a flesh and blood creature that had yet been discovered. And once it realized that we weren't a threat, it just turned around and hurried its pace and rushed up or walked up the area that we had jogged up. So it followed up the gravel road and we lost track of it. After I got over the hair on my arms and my body finally settling down and my legs stopped shaking and tears in your eyes, Alan and I had what would I consider to be a friendly little argument about, no, let's just cross the bridge and go home. I'm done with this. Because as I said, I wasn't going to look at this pathway that I was training on for football ever the same again. We argued for about 2 or 3 minutes, and he wanted to follow, and he did convince me of that, and we started out. Now, on first observations of such things, on that fine filtering of snow and the ground rock hard, there was no indentation on the steps or on the prints, but I could see that the creature was barefoot, and you could see the separation point between the toes and the regular ball of the foot. It was barefoot, of course, as I'd mentioned, and I stood in those tracks, and I have a size 9 approximately, and there was room more than enough on all sides of my runner, of course. But I also noticed that when I went from step to step to follow this thing in that morning, I would have to jump from its walking pace from step to step. I noticed that the footprints were straight ahead of each other. They weren't offset like how we walked. They were straight ahead, and there was quite a distance in between. And it was not based on stride. It was based on step. And we put a piece of cardboard over one step that we found because of the filtering of snow, and we couldn't preserve anything. Didn't have a camera, nothing available that we could picture. And we sort of left it at that. We followed for a bit and never seen it again. We got up top, which would be near the Princeton Municipal Airport. It's really an uncontrolled type airport, lonely sort of stretch, and used just for emergencies or just local people that just might have a single-engine aircraft or things like this. We got up top, which would be near the municipal airport, looked around, and at that time we felt we were getting too close to would be the sort of like the foothills or the woods into its environment at that point. And, of course, at that time, because of what we've just seen, we thought that every big tree or stump or whatever we saw in the early morning was it doing whatever, so we just backed off, went home. The only person or persons that we really told was my younger brother, Richard, and my mother at that time, and kept it quiet because of credibility issues and everything for my training for ball, because I loved the NFL and was working on those issues in the past, just trying out to live in the dream. Kept rather quiet, except for I would ultimately contact the forestry and file it with them, just so that they had an idea that there was something running around in the region. Never told my friends or individuals about it, but interestingly enough, at any time I went jogging in that area or hiking or biking or anything we did concerning training, I would try to lure one of them with me on any given day or when I was training, because I didn't want to go alone. As I'd mentioned, over the years, I'd watched quite fiercely on the woods and different things. Now, putting all that aside, I would meet my wife, Rosemary. We would move to Calgary, Alberta, and then over time, we would go back and forth and visit my mother, who was in Princeton, and she was there for quite a few years. The boys growing up, we'd take them back and forth to see Grandma, and when we visited Princeton, we made it a habit of just going out and taking a drive and looking. We liked that kind of thing, and always did, being outdoorsmen or hunters or different things like that. And the one year, we were visiting 11 years later in 1985. Now, that was in October, and we were presently visiting my mother. And Richard, my youngest brother, he decided, well, let's go out for a drive and take a look-see and just see how things are going out here, and you never know if we'll run into the big guy. And I said, well, yeah, sure, why not? Now, it wasn't the first time. We'd done it and gone out so many times, either for walks, different people and myself, friends or people that you knew. And this October evening, about 9:30 at night, we, at that time, he had his car, Richard was driving, and we had gone up what's called a shelf gravel road that we had the sighting at in 1974, so it's 11 years earlier. Now, when we went, which would be it's a little roadway that's below the airport. There's a little hillside there, and it's a lonely stretch of real estate, I call it. There's only at that time, about 3 or 4 properties, people living up top. Princeton set up as such, if people look it up. If you go the Brown Bridge across, and then there's an immediate cliff there, and then up top, and that's where we would be. Now, this was the first pass that evening, and we were just going down the road, and it was dark, and we were coming to one of the properties, and I picked up on movement that was coming out from the property. Now, whatever it was at that time had its arm up on the gate, which would be a fair size, and it was coming out. Now, I could just sense or see that it didn't want to be caught on that side of the road, and it would dart out in front of us. Now, I had the same feeling come up as I had 11 years earlier, and Richard spotted it. We didn't say anything. He jammed on the brakes, and it was a gravel road. The dust is passing the car. I can't see anything at that time. We lost whatever it was in the darkness. Well, Richard would back that car up so that it sat sort of on and off the gravel road, and it was pointing up to the hillside that went to the airport. And we found out that the creature that night would use a deer trail to get up to that region, so it was intelligently using that trail. The interesting thing to that is I would get a way better view or sighting of these forest giants than ever before. And that night, it was caught on the hillside and shuffling its weight nervously from foot to foot. It didn't know roughly what to do at the moment. I watched the breath come off that thing, and I could see it was dirty and it had matted hair, and it was the same type of thing, almost size-wise, just we were getting it in the lights of the car, and there was a definite showing. I could feel my, like my weight just pushed back in the seat, because it was like you were watching an outdoor movie or a drive-in. And same type of thing, an intelligence to the beast, and then it looked like it realized again, or of course it could be a different one entirely, but it just went to a dead run. And I kid you not, is that I've never seen something move so fast and such big strides, and a thing that, as I said, in both these cases, this creature was about 8 feet, just over 8 feet tall, over 600 pounds, and I would watch that thing go to a dead run. It was over the hillside in seconds. Now, Richard would respond. He sort of blamed me, and I sort of blamed him of who made the first move, but the car ended up getting down the roadway. We were going to go around, drive around the other side of the airport to see if we could see anything else, because it was heading that way. Now, the creature in 1974, these both males, because we didn't see any glands like for female or anything like that, so they were males. And you could tell by the body structuring and the way the muscles work, things like that, that we're not talking suits or being hoaxed here. And we got over the other side of the airport, never seen nothing, but realized at that time that in both these cases, and I'd heard other cases in this Princeton area, that they were always making their exit north and along this region of the municipal airport, because once it crossed the fence, it was still a restricted area, so man couldn't go in there. But they were using it to get across, and once they got across, they were into the foothills in the Princeton region, and then they'd move north. And we would find out over time that these creatures were coming down from north of Princeton, near the Colmont area, this type of thing. Now, I would notice that almost 8.5 months later, I would talk to a researcher, Thomas Steenberg, over the years out of British Columbia, and he had mentioned to me that that time, 8 or 9 months after our 85 sighting in 1986, there was a female Sasquatch that was in the Colmont area, about 11 kilometers away, I think it was, and she was taunting and having issues with cabin owners up there over about a 5-week period. So everything started to tie in, and I started to put it together over the years concerning this. Now, real quickly, because my issues is that with the background that we have, I wanted to state to listeners that I don't have a drug issue or alcohol issues or things like this, subject to hallucinatory type situations and stuff, rather sound individual. And there's no reason to see things like this or whatever was going on. I would try to gather my thoughts over the years on why us, because what I will mention is we've had 4 family individuals, and we had ongoing things occur with them. I'll relate to 1970. It's in the Princeton area again, of course. And our mother was coming home one night, let's say around June 1970. She would get within 50 feet of one of the forest giants or forest people as it had come out. We lived on Harold Avenue, and it borderlines a finger or stretch of woods where I would find over the years where they were coming through to get into the town site. I would find out over the years that, of course, that they were coming in for garden yields, fruit, vegetables. During the hunting season, I found they were coming in for deer kills in sheds or at the dump there where the entrails and different things were being dumped off. I even had a business owner. She explained to me that she had seen the creature there. I have her story in a book project that I've done and will be out shortly. But in 1970, our mother was coming home at night, and I had never seen her and would never see her again be so fearful as if she was going to die. As she pounded on the front door that night, and we let her in because the door was locked, and we let her in. She fell into the house and went down on all fours and crawled and gouged her way behind a recliner that was on the other side of the living room. We didn't get anything out of her at the time, except for the only thing she would tell us at that time, fearful as if she was going to be killed, was she said there was something outside that was half man, half animal. Over the years, she wouldn't describe the face, but she did say that it was a giant, haired head to toe, and she said that it looked at her and had its hand up on the gate across the street, opening it, and it was going in. I would find over the years, talking to the individual, as a Chinese gentleman, and he had the most luscious gardens and things he took pride of over the years, and I would find that the Sasquatch individuals were going into garden situations to take what they needed or whatever the case they were doing. And as was happening with my mom, she wouldn't talk about it much over the years, but what she saw that night struck a fear into her, and she sat at the kitchen table for, I would think, it had to be for hours on end, for at least 3-4 days, and just looked staringly out the kitchen window and just wonder, because she was totally fearful of what she had seen. So that was, at that point, that was 4 individuals of our family that had seen such things. Now, the last case, I've got 2, but the last case mainly is the strangest of all, and I would like to think that it was just, a young person or something, but we had, where we were, on Harold Avenue, and it's the same house that where our mother had witnessed that one in 1970. The one evening we had a basement set up. It was rather primitive. I called it like a dungeon, and there's no real lighting down there, but we had the 2 freezers underneath on 2 dirt mounds, and Mom was an excellent baker type thing, and she'd make up all kinds of breads, cookies, different things like that. One night she said, "Hey, do you want to go down and get," I forget what even it was, but Alan and I headed out the back door, and we were going underneath. Now, you were to take a latch off a plywood door, and you were to walk in. Sadly, it was a dirt floor. I called it a dungeon. That's how I felt. It was cold. There was no real heating in there. It was separated from the main part of the house. There was no way in other than out the back door and through the plywood door. When Alan and I got down there, we noticed that the latch was off. The door was closed, but there was a spring on it, so it would do that. Alan had the flashlight in his hand, and we were going down for some goodies. He'd swing that door open, and he'd had the flashlight on the entrance to the back wall. And we immediately saw movement, dark, black movement. There was only that height of that basement was just over, I would think, something like 5 feet, if I can recall. I was younger then. But we didn't know what was in there. But there was no way out except through us or by us. And we would watch whatever it was pass behind a pillar that held one of the pillars that held the house up. It would pass behind that. I could see it was stirring up dust, so I thought I was seeing something real. And what I thought was unusual, because I would ask researchers and investigators over the years when I was starting to look into things, and I would ask, would an animal or a creature of any kind, wouldn't it look at you at one point and try to get away? Well, it was doing that because it was moving off into the far corner of the basement, but it never did look at us. Alan would drop that flashlight, and we would yell and scream, and yell and scream as such that our younger brother, Richard, would actually lock us out of the house just temporarily and then let us in. Now, whatever was in that basement, I would like to have believed that it was just like, say, some young offender or someone our age, and if it was, they were trespassing and we kicked their backside. But because of how things were and what we thought we saw, because it was sort of flowing, whatever was covering it was sort of moving off and flowing with it, dark head to toe, and we didn't want to go back in there. The joke was of it all is that we hoped whatever it was enjoyed the peanut butter cookies. So that's how we felt about those issues.
I do have to ask, though, real quickly, was there any odor or smell to any of these things?
No. On all instances, we never really picked up on too much of an odor on anything. The 74 might have had a different type of morning, say, idea of it, but not much. I'm glad you mentioned it, though, because on the final scenario that we had to deal with as a family total, this would have been 2005 now, and this is with my wife Rosemary and our youngest boy Adrian. We've been renting and enjoying the forestry rental lookout program for 14 years. I'd locate that real quickly to mention it. I located it on the internet when we got our PC in 2000, and it's a really well done up program by the U.S. Forestry, and the towers that were in operation, they've put a lot of them on a recreation program. There's almost 70 of them. Long story short, and renting different structures in Montana, Idaho, Oregon, California, that kind of thing. I never really thought of it at the time because there'd been so many years separation of what we had witnessed, what we had encountered. But the one time in 2005 at Lincoln County's Webb Mountain, which is across the Canadian border and near Eureka, Montana, across from Lake Koocanusa, and we were in that tower one summer weekend for 3 or 4 nights. Now, just because of what we'd witnessed over time and what I had started to research and I was writing about, there's a lot of people that had drilled me or trained me or taught me things about tracks and tracking and sighting and encountering and different things that to look for out of the ordinary that is completely different. I never thought about it, but it happened at Webb Mountain when we were there. On, I think it was the Friday evening, I went down. I'm also a photographer, and I wanted to get some sunset pictures of the tower, and I moved off towards the west a few hundred feet and was taking some pictures, doing my thing. I had an odor come up from down in the little valley there, and it was just different. I've never come across it. It was a combination of maybe rotten eggs, distant propane, whatever, however you want to address it. And I didn't say anything. But I looked at the tower, and our boy Adrian was standing out on the deck, and he was viewing things. But as I started to walk towards the tower, he said, "Dad, do you smell that?" He says, "It's awful." And I thought it was interesting because I didn't say a word to him, but he was getting the same kind of odor. He'd come down off that tower, and we would go to an edge where I was earlier, and I thought that it was a real excellent area for a predator to sit and wait for deer or something to come up, because it channeled itself as such so that you could wait there. There's a lot of wind to the region, and the breeze would come up so that whatever was coming up from the valley wouldn't know what's up top as a predator. So that's what I was thinking, but I was thinking more of a mountain lion or bear or whatever issue was out there. Now, thing is, when Adrian and I was over there, I was about 40 feet from him, and he heard a god-awful scream. And I only heard the tail end of it, but when I got to him, the hair on his body was standing up, and he said, "Dad, it sounds like a woman is in trouble or something like this." And I'd only heard the tail end of it, but I said, "Oh, no, I just don't got time for this." I said, "Let's just get to the tower where we're safe, and we'll just call it an evening, and away we go." So we would just call it a night. And the next day we'd go into Kalispell, Montana. It's about just over under an hour and a half away. We'd spend the day there, and we'd come back to the lookout. The lookout is a concrete structure, this one, only about 20 feet high. And the problem I had with this lookout is the only one we've ever rented that didn't have a security factor concerning a trap door or something on the tower that would keep something off the deck. There was about 25 steps, and the issue I had was that if anything wanted to come up, like a mountain lion or anything like that, you'd just have to walk up. So we actually put a huge fire screen that was there, because you can have fires, and we did that. We would go to bed that night, and at 2:10 in the morning, I'd hear a sort of like a blip or a beep, and I'd sit up, and sure enough, it was my wife's cell phone going off. The battery was low. I'd sit there, listen to it for a couple of beeps, and then I'd say, "Hey, hon, can you shut that off so I can go back to sleep?" But where I was situated, she's got the single bed. Adrian and I have mattresses, and we're laying down at floor level. Well, I have my ear close to where the firefinder in Webb Mountain, they have firefinders in the middle of the room. And this one here had a hollow section in it, and you couldn't look down in there into the room below, because it wasn't for us, it was for firewood for visitors, and they'd come and take it out. That's what forestry did, and they had the lock on the door. It's a metal door, and so I'm listening, and I can hear the lock on the door being played with, being yanked. I wasn't happy, because here we are. For some people, it'd be in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I could sit up and see the lights of the town of Eureka across the Lake Koocanusa, but I wasn't happy because we had visitors. At that time, I was thinking that somebody had just come in and they were fiddling around. But the issue is with these towers is that down the road on most of these lookouts is that there's a safety factor, and you have a gate that you lock behind you. They give you the combination numbers, and it locks behind you, and then you're good to go. And the only people that are coming in is the people that are walking in. Well, we had visitors, so I know somebody might have done that. I would listen to that lock being yanked a bit, and then I could hear something go off the stairs. It was 2 concrete stairs, but I could hear it jump off. The kind of rock substance that's around that tower, it's not the hollow type, but it'd be like a specialized rock where you could hear something heavy moving around, whether it was deer or elk or whatever's trucking the region. I would listen to whatever it was come around 2 corners of the tower and come in contact with a beer bottle that was between rocks off to the east side of the lookout. I hadn't got up and stand up yet, and I was listening. I could hear that bottle being rattled a little bit, and then I heard nothing. Then I could hear it again, but over more, and it was being set down. So something hadn't shoved it along, something had picked it up. Now, over a span, this would last for almost 2 hours. Whatever it was went to the south side of the tower. now we could hear rock being moved. It was moving a lot of rock and picking it up, setting it aside. Now, my wife had fallen asleep again, bless her heart, and Adrian and I were sitting up with our hearts in our throat, and we're just wondering what's going on, because at this point, we didn't think it was like mankind, because why would they be interested in moving rocks the south side of the tower? Now, we would find out that people were throwing their grease and gray water off the south side of the tower, not supposed to, but they were. Now, whatever it was looking for food, substance, and going through that rock trying to pick it up. We knew that something was going on that weekend that way, food-wise, because we'd seen deer come up and lick the rock, so something was there. Now, this would go on for a while. It would get quiet. I would hear something. Adrian had now fallen asleep, and I would hear something clear its throat, sort of like a gargle. And then it went quiet for a second. And then I would hear nothing, and it was dead quiet. But then I heard like a run, like something running, and then there's a drop-off of about 4 or 5 feet from the tower. It had come up, and it had landed near the tower, and it had landed like a solid footing together rather than, like, let's say, a bighorn or any kind of the deer family where, you know, they're slipping and sliding. It would go to an immediate walk, and then it would quiet a little bit, because you could hear on this kind of rock that was around the tower. It's a large rock. We would find that these creatures, how many ever there were trying to stick to rock substance and not be tracked. Then I knew that there was more than what I felt was one, because I could hear a whistle. There was a communication, and then I could hear walking along to the west side of the tower. Now, I was hoping in that time span of dawn coming, I could just see the outline of Glacier National Park in the east. And as that started to lighten up, I could hear whatever it was, and they were walking off. They were walking off to the west into that gully where they could disappear down into the valley, and it was done. And one of the reasons people had asked me over the years concerning this process, they said, well, why didn't you get up, go outside with a big light and shine it on it and see what it was? The problem I had is because we're not allowed to carry arms, being Canadians there, the Americans, are, of course, are armed in the towers, and I'd love to be. But my problem is with family, I didn't want to jeopardize their health, and I felt that if there was just a remote idea that it was two individuals from wherever, Montana, with high-powered rifles, I wasn't going out and challenging that, because all I had at that time was bought bear spray that we got in Kalispell, so that was the limit on that. But when we got home from that, we would address this. I'd look into the region, would find other things going on, including another rental tower, Big Creek Baldy, just to the southwest, I think it was, and a couple from Lewiston had actually seen the species. They'd seen what they think was larger Sasquatch creatures sort of trying to hide in what tree there was right there near the tower, but they seen with their own eyes under a lantern up top, 41 feet up, and timed it because they were being intimidated by what was coming up on the lead stairway underneath the tower. There's 3 or 4 sets of stairways going up to the trap door, and they were 40-plus feet high, and they got a good visual of a hairy arm coming down off the last flight of stairs, and that creature disappearing, which they thought was around 5 feet, disappearing in with the others that were hiding in the shadows. So that's pretty well what's gone on in our entire situation with all these things.
Well, I noticed you mentioned sulfur. It's interesting you said that. That's not typical, from my understanding, of any animal. Javelina, for instance, they've got their scent glands on the back that are very, very pungent. But what I've noticed that whenever sulfur is involved, that it usually has to do with a breach in the spirit realm or some type of demonic or evil entity, especially during deliverances, and I've mentioned that before. But when you first saw these, you mentioned about your eyes tearing up and there was an emotion, and you talked about your heart beating in your throat. Do you feel evil when you're around these things at all?
Well, like we had discussed earlier, Scott, the issue is being an outdoor type individual over the years. Been a number of things. I'd hunted, done different things, training. Our boys are now an international climber here and there, our oldest, all that kind of thing. But here's the thing, is that being now in Calgary, Alberta, I had the opportunity, I don't know if it was good, but it worked out very well. We had my next door neighbor, he's not here now, but they moved away, but him and I had gone out mountain biking along Alberta's Highway 40 before it opened. It opens up around, I think it's something like June 15th. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that we had run into a grizzly at Miss Creek, and we were on the roadway, and that bear would semi-stand and sniff us out, and the feeling that I got that morning was nothing like the feelings I got with 1974, especially 1985. Those two situations, they were completely different, but it was more based on knowing what you were seeing and the fear of it all. The other situation was our oldest boy, the climber, Brandon, him and I had run into a grizzly at same thing along Highway 40, but the other end, near the Upper Lake area, Kananaskis Upper Lakes, and same type of thing. Just take it easy, plan it out. Bear not really interested in you. They're both grizzly in both cases. And I would like to say that when people say in some circumstances that it's a bear you saw, or did you think you seen a bear, I can tell you with 100% fact and put my life on it that no, there's a world of difference between Sasquatch, Bigfoot creatures, and the grizzly. For the fear factor is one thing, but for spirituality, that's something that of course I'm addressing right now, because having the evangelical background, there was a number of red flags that have occurred over the years with what's gone to the paranormal subject, and a lot of, especially once you leave the British Columbia, say Canadian region, and start to drop down, the further you go down into the United States, maybe even northern Mexico, but mainly the U.S., the native tribes, bands, Native American people believe that the Sasquatch Bigfoot is an off-planet entity or a big brother that comes in times of trouble, and I've had a number of them, sincere, ask me if I've had trouble in my life, because once they realized what we had saw or what I had seen and I was sincere, they asked me particularly that, is that if I had trouble in my life, and because obviously you had seen it, because there was factors that I explained to them that say only these creatures do. That was brought to my attention by researchers and investigators concerning nervous movement by such a species where they move their weight from foot to foot when they're nervous or when they're going to take flight or whatever it was. So my findings over the years are starting to go in that direction, is that we're dealing with a spiritual issue now because of my research and investigative work.
Yeah, I those who have had these situations or have had a definite one-on-one demonic, they've needed prayer, they've needed deliverance, they're having all kinds of issues, health issues, mental torment, bad dreams, and even reoccurrences of visitations. You mentioned you called them forest giants or forest people. Is that typical for your area that you call it that instead of Sasquatch?
A lot of the individuals in the research community don't like calling such like say an undiscovered species, beasts or creatures or things that go bump in the night. They're trying to hold on to it being just an undiscovered giant that's been lucky on a combination of talents that it has. Problem, as I said, what I'm having is I've got individuals that I know or have contacted me or a number of different avenues, and there's been folks that have said that they're telepathically communicating with these creatures, and now we're seeing more activity, and it's getting intense that UFO sightings are close to Bigfoot sightings, or they're getting closer together where they're being seen in the same region at the same time, and that's coming about more and more.
I was going to say, my situation that I ran into back in Arizona and the White Mountains, or west of the White Mountains, the Mogollon area, I went up there to do a little hike, but at the same time, I knew that there was a paranormal area that I had run into years before, and now that I was a stronger Christian and was seasoned in deliverance, I thought that I'd go looking for trouble, and I found it. And I came across a situation where whatever I disturbed, I knew that there was a evil presence, and it was up a canyon, and it didn't want me to come any further, and it hurled a very, very large boulder, went whizzing past me about the size of a bowling ball at a very high rate of speed. And I picked my battles. I decided, to fight another day, so I retreated. But that situation was enough for me to know that these creatures have a intelligence. They have the ability to know, which I believe, since I am a Christian, that I believe in Jesus Christ, that it knew that, and that if I had come any closer, that it would have been challenged farther than it normally would have for most other people. But again, these names, they call it the Mogollon Monster there, because of the Mogollon Rim, forest people, Sasquatch, Yeti. Is there just a general name that you like to call it?
I always usually go with the Sasquatch Bigfoot issue. Sasquatch is a northern name, so to speak, a Bigfoot southern name. There's the Yeti, of course, in the Tibetan aspect of things. The Yowie is an Australian version of the Sasquatch. You've even got the Florida skunk ape, Falkland monster. You've got also, which starts to get a little bit bizarre, and I've investigated that end of it as well because I've turned over all the shells, is the Wendigo, and it's more like a fantasy type creature, but it starts to realm off into, like, say, what I looked into a little bit when I talked to, just briefly years ago, George Knapp with the Skinwalker Ranch issue. And a Bigfoot-type upright creature or a wolf creature using portals or dimensional doorways that were on the ranch real estate area type thing. I've investigated in-depthly on these things and found a lot of circumstances. I narrowed it down, of course, where tracks now are disappearing in the middle of nowhere after fresh snow, after people have just, or dairy farmer or a ice fisherman in Idaho, hunters in Region 5, Washington State. Those type of individuals are just seeing a giant upright creature, and then when they pursue it immediately, it's gone around the side of the barn, or it's cleared a fence, it's in a clearing, it's in fresh snow, tracks end, done. There's no jump-off points, there's no falling through ice, there's no backing, depth changes in the tracks, there's no wiggle points, there's no takeoff. It's just a normal walking pace. The one individual, as you and I had discussed, he actually looked up in the sky, the dairy farmer, and he said, Glenn, he said, that's the only place it could go. There's no other way that it got anywhere because it was something like 75 feet to the tree line, and he says, I just seen it. My dogs wouldn't go. I just saw it, and it's disappeared just in the middle of a clearing, past walking over my barbed wire fence, and it's gone. I would find over time that more of this is coming about, and I know there's quite a few of the Native Americans that I've talked to, and they said, well, we won't track it, but we can't track it. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Because they had mentioned that, well, a lot of times, depending on who they are and what they do, they take pride in what they do, and they sleep like what they're chasing, or they eat like what they're chasing or following, and they said we're not or shouldn't follow something as such. Now, I would pry over the years on a number of issues, and as I'd mentioned earlier, is that a lot of them, or paranormal people, believe that this is an off-planet creature that uses doorways, dimensional doorways, or portals, and that's where they're accomplishing their goals. I've got stories based on that type of issue, ones I've narrowed down from the crazies and from different things. But when you start to get into the paranormal issues, and I've actually talked with some of the world's trackers from different countries, and the paranormal word and name, for how they ever pronounce it, is coming into almost every conversation concerning their country's idea of what they have as a Sasquatch creature under different names. Some I can't even pronounce, but they said, no, it can't be tracked to destination, and we're not dealing with normal situations anymore. This is way past that.
You know, I absolutely agree about the portals, the stargates, and it being some type of dimensional creature. When I man-tracked for Maricopa County Sheriff's back in the late 80s and 90s, there was a gentleman we were looking for on Schoolhouse Road, Cave Creek, Carefree area, if anyone's familiar with that. And we found his tracks, and we're tracking him to locate him. He was lost. He was older. He had health issues, but he loved to take walks, and he just didn't return. We found his tracks. They went across a small wash, a very sandy area that if anything had, walked across it or come into it, you would see the tracks plainly. So we found his tracks going across the water, probably 10, 15 feet out of the water, and then they just stopped, just like you were talking about, as if something had reached down and plucked him out, and he was never seen again. So whatever was going on there, I believe it was some type of supernatural event. That area, by the way, is very high in activity of UFOs, and I believe that there was a relation to that. Now, you also mentioned that you heard this creature whistling. There's been information, Steve Quayle's talked about this, that the different harmonic or fundamental frequencies may be one approach for opening these stargates, as well as a communication, but telepathy or through mind communication, you mentioned that as well. I think a lot of people that I have to deal with that have the demonic situations is because of this mind control, which is really not that. I believe it's a type of familiar spirit, an entity that is able to come in and infect the mind, much like witchcraft. And so these things, these creatures, it's interesting because to say that they're physical, well, we're seeing them as physical, but yet they cloak, they disappear, they're able to go into some type of invisible mode, into another dimension. So does that mean that they're demons? That's really the big question, and so why this particular creature of all things to come and go, which has obviously been going on for a very long time. You mentioned Skinwalker Ranch. I'm really not that familiar with it. I had a friend that I was with over the weekend who wanted me to ask you about that. Where exactly is Skinwalker Ranch?
From what I've gathered, I was actually invited down into the region by another author. It was a Native American author. She said if you're in the region, drop by for coffee or breakfast or something. Let's say I think it's a few hundred miles east of Salt Lake City, just to be, roughly there.
Okay, and as the American Indian thing, you were also talking about Pine Ridge when I had mentioned that I was on a couple of their shows that you were in that area too, or getting information from that area.
Yes, that's true. Years ago, when I was researching the Native American end of it and the Bigfoot issue, I had talked with a couple of fellows, communication-wise, as well as emails, and it was an individual with tribal police, as well as soft-spoken individuals that once they realized that I wasn't pulling their leg and that something serious was with the issue, they had brought up the past with I can't remember his name. I think it was Leonard. His first name was Leonard. He had that big run-in with the FBI on Pine Ridge years ago, where there was numerous deaths and different things related to that. But there was Bigfoot Sasquatch sightings on Pine Ridge years ago, and a native fellow would say to me, he said, Glenn, he says, these creatures come about or step through to areas when there is times of trouble. Now, they call them Big Brother or Scout, and there's been situations that I've looked into in the past. I don't take it as a laughing matter because it is serious. I've had a few individuals contact me, and once I filtered out, as I said, the ones that were looking for fame or whatever the case may be, they said that they either had been abducted or they had problems with the Bigfoot or the extraterrestrial. And they had mentioned that, as an example, it's pretty wild because I'm not into that field, ufology, but they had mentioned that Bigfoot is supposed and a supposed scout for the extraterrestrial. Now, I have a problem with that issue because, see, what we experienced in the past, I'm trying to explain, and being a biblical believer and a Christian fellow, is I've tried to ask God, why us, and what's the point to it all? We've been exposed to something, and they said, well, listen, if you've seen the scout and there's problems and there's different things, see, what I had mentioned to the Native American people that I did talk to that were interested in this, and we had communication with it, is I said I had a problem on my end because on our sightings, I've never believed that in 74 and 85, especially on those sightings, that we were viewing a scout or an extraterrestrial individual. And I had a problem with that because, for instance, when my brother yelled out to it, and we actually startled that giant that morning, I don't believe you startle an alien or extraterrestrial.
Yeah, I've said that these particular creatures or beings or demonic entities, being that they are in contact all the time, there is no distance in the spirit realm. So this familiar spirit or this communication that they have, that I believe that these creatures have a handler, much like the black-eyed children. And so I agree with you. You don't come up on them. They're aware of it. I think it's a matter of the level of threat that you are to them, whether they react to it or not.
Yeah, and you see, the issue was, too, is that based on those sightings and the individuals I've talked to over the years, they said, Glenn, yes, your family's been involved. We don't know all the details, but something is going on. They actually said it was like being a Sasquatch Bigfoot magnet, but my issue is that what came up as a red flag to me, nothing against people, but they said, well, have you been on a vision quest, or are you going on a vision quest, and are you looking for a future guardian or a power animal or a spirit guide, or animism, or your totem animal. Now, I've looked into these things, and it's a no-no for me. That's just not my thing. But it's out there, and I find that more people are looking into it, more people are doing it. There's shamanism involved, and there's different techniques, and there's different things. It's something that I walk away from because, as I said, in the back of my mind, and my brothers as well, is that we're hoping, or I haven't talked to them in a while, but we're hoping that what we saw in the past would make it so simple to be like I said, just an undiscovered species that has been the luckiest thing. But see, with the companies, I've worked with some of the, not on their payroll, but back and forth with them through communication, and they said, okay, you're looking into things, and you know that. Now, I actually found this hard to believe, but I actually had another researcher contact me. He said, Glenn, are the numbers real? And you see, at this moment, there is approximately, or could be more than 2.5 million trail cams or cameras in operation throughout all of North America at any given time. Anywhere, any place, there's been cameras that have been taken in by helicopters, all kinds of things. Now, they showed me, these different companies, they said, look, they said, we've got cameras, and cameras watching cameras, and they're watching cameras. They power up, they do things. We're finding, and have showed you thousands of pictures, but we don't have a picture of this, what you're talking about and researching. Why not? And I said, because it's not normal now. We're in a gray area, and the problem is that the cameras are only catching things like shadows, and some of them are being covered, some of them are being destroyed, and we're talking sometimes in the middle of nowhere where man seldom goes except for whoever is delivering the goods. And I talked to, a few years ago now, researcher, investigator, and one of the say the bigger names of the Sasquatch gig would be Peter Burns. And many years ago, I think it was in the 1960s, out of the Dalles, Oregon, they set up a command center at, I think it was Flat Top Mountain. Now, there was numerous sightings, and it was continuous. Now, they would set up there for 24/7, and it would be manned, and I think it was over a 2-year period, and they had next to nothing. The creature disappeared, but then when they tore down, it was back. I found that strange because you'd have to have special talents, and I'm finding in my research that more of these talents are coming up. Now, Scott, the issue is, too, that we've discussed, you and I, and I'd like the listener to know, and the problems that I'm having is that the Sasquatch, through certain paranormal researchers and others, are being asked a biblical question about different things. Now, the creature itself, responding to them, usually telepathically, are stating that it's something that we don't necessarily know, but our, say, boss, the extraterrestrial, knows. Now, what would that make the extraterrestrial?
Well, again, that would be a type of handler or the fixed demonic controller.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still there?
I am, yep.
Okay. Well, I wanted to point out that these cameras and so forth, that, you know, I was in electronic engineering for quite some time, and I manufactured the CCD, and now they call it a CMOS type camera. The sensitivity or the spectrum is more of the white light and into the infrared. But they also will have a clock or an oscillator, and that oscillator, the particular frequency, is a governor that determines the increments of the processing that's taking place. And like a microprocessor or a microcontroller, even digital. And so these would give off a resonance or a fundamental frequency that any of these creatures, if they came into proximity of that camera or in the area, they would be able to sense that and to know to go around it, or to then go into that cloaking, that invisible mode. So I think other technologies that may have to do with what they call Hall effect or any type of movement to alter the magnetic fields or the static fields would be a better trigger. But either way, I think because they're able to again have that handler or that dimensional communication, that makes that whole thing a very difficult experience to capture them.
Mhm. Yeah. See, there, on our conversation a little while back there on that fellow that I was not working with, but know about how the camera systems that he builds and he uses in the East, in West Virginia as an example. And he had mentioned that the strangeness involved with that, because he had a sighting with two other fellows in 1995. He would put a lot of financing into an issue of trying to address this phenomena for almost 2 years. And he said on the final result to things, he said, this is nowhere normal, and it's right outside the box now. It's something that, they've got special talents, but you see, it all comes back to why I started to write about such things years ago and investigate and research it intensely and uncover everything, was that we startled one in 74, watched it and addressed it in 85, and watched the breath come out of the lungs of the thing and watch it go to a dead run. And if you can surprise them and how the sightings are taking place and how people are running across them, and it's funny that you can get thousands of sightings ultimately, but yet you can get nothing on film or video, and that is the key. Like when people ask me, they said, well, what should we do if we sight one? And I jokingly say right away, photo it, just so that you've got it, and then turn around and report it to the necessary channels and whatever you have to do.
The information that I was giving out a couple of weeks ago on a show was on how the eye communicates to the brain and the peripheral vision, that there's actually two modes of processing that takes place. You've one that's in the gaze of the center of the eye and in the peripheral. And so those who see shadow people, those who see different things that move around, a lot of them see it in the peripheral. And I think the reason is, at least what I was explaining, is that processing is a slower mode. So it's kind of like capturing every third or fourth frame, like on a videotape, and they tend to catch that one particular point. And so that may be the same situation we see with these particular creatures. But if we were to visually see them one-on-one like you did, and you mentioned that you felt something that was different than when you would come across other animals. So the question is this something that radiates out from them, or did you think that this was a spiritual type of thing that was, because you know, even your son said the hair stood up on his body. So what do you think? Do you think this is coming from them, or is it just in the whole presence around you when it's happening?
I'd like to believe that. See, I investigated years ago too what's called, if anybody's heard of infrasound. There's creatures out there, or there's animals and different species out there, elephants, tigers. There's different ones, and they found, as an example, that elephants are communicating, kilometers away by special vibrations in their larynx and things like that. It's being uncovered as they start to research this. I'd like to believe that in our case it was fear of not knowing, like what we were dealing with, and knowing that the thing could rush up to you and kill you in an instant. A person has to see to believe, only because when you're looking at something so huge, broad shoulders, massive intelligence-type creature, and we estimated its size because it came in contact with shrubs and branch that overhung the gravel road, and we took a tape to that and measured just over around 8 feet high, and then estimated. I'm not good at poundages, but broke it down to that. My problem is that with the biblical background to me and what I'm seeing this species in a paranormal atmosphere being asked biblical questions now. That's a red flag for the Christian community that are knowing, and what I'm also seeing is that we're not picking it up with our technology, and their specialized groups and retired military, retired government people. There's even what if the viewer listener knows is what's called remote viewing. They're trying to find this species through remote viewing, and it's a touchy issue as well. But it has to do and starts to borderline astral travel and occult technique and different things like that. So it's something that I won't go in depthly into, but finding that we've gone from, the 1967, let's say, Patterson-Gimlin film. I seen it when I was a youngster. That, to me, was a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. That was a female Sasquatch in Northern California, Bluff Creek area. Left tracks. I've had the opportunity to talk briefly with Bob Gimlin about what he believes. He'll believe it till his last day. And the issue is that's what I'd like to believe. There's a number of issues that have come up in my research, and it's not going that level, and it's becoming really touchy, and it's going away even from scientific because of what's happening. A real quick story is that it came into my hands here in the last month or so, and it was a fellow in California out on a hike. He likes hiking the rainy, overcast days for relaxation and R&R. And he'd come out of the woods. He was near a clearing, and he sat himself up against a tree, and he's just listening to the rainfall. And he heard, sort of off to his left, he heard noise coming out of the woods, and it was in the muck and mud. And he could hear that suction, that sloshing, that coming up, and immediately out of that section of the woods comes the Sasquatch. Huge creature, and just like we've described along that line. Now, that would force him back into that tree. He said, I could feel the bark on my back as I pushed myself up against that, this huge thing standing there. It was so close that he could see the raindrops coming off the hair of the thing at numerous spots, and the creature wasn't in a hurry, but it was intelligently looked like studying that clearing in front of them. It was not a big clearing, but it was a clearing. And it's like it didn't want to immediately go out into the clearing, but stopped. Now, he stated to me that he never saw that forest giant turn and look at him directly, but it seemed to know that he was there. Didn't give him a glance, but he was there. Now, as soon as that feeling came over him, that thing started to head off into the clearing, and it was right only a few feet in front of him. And it ended up being something like 15, 20 feet. I forget what I wrote out here. But then when he's watching this thing go out into the clearing and it's taking flight and really going, then he hears another noise from the same area coming out of the woods, same type of suction and things in the mud. Now he's thinking number two's coming out, or he's thinking that there's another animal in there. Now, by the time that he looked to his left and waited for whatever was making the noise to come out, he went immediately back to the first creature that walked out of the woods. It's gone. Now, he thought that, well, what's going on and what's happening here? He immediately stood, and it's just raining and this, that, a little bit misty in around the area, and he thought, okay, well, I've just missed something here. Now, he would begin to follow those deep tracks in the muck, and he would situate himself sort of sideways and sort of moving on so that he could watch if anything come out of the woods now, because he knew something was back there. He didn't know what it was. And he wanted to know where number one suspect went. Well, he got to the end of the tracks, and they were gone. And it was in the mud, and he said he didn't understand any of it, and it didn't and couldn't make sense of it. But then when he sorted it out, and I talked to the fellow, and he stated that, he says, Glenn, he says, there was a crackle in the air like, I don't know how to explain it, he says, like a tuning fork in your head, and you know how you get that buzz from whatever it is you're hearing, and it sort of throws you off for a second, but then there's a cackle or a crackle in the air. He says, that's all I got. And he says, and then, like I said, that's all I heard. And I didn't see that thing again. I looked around. He says, I started to contaminate the tracks. He says, I walked all over the place. He says, I don't know where it went. He says, to this day, I don't know where it went. Number two, or whatever was in the woods, didn't come out. But whatever it was, if it's a coincidence or whatever subtracted him, he just took his mind off the matter for a few seconds, and that allowed number one to disappear. And he doesn't know where it went.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned infrasound, the extremely low spectrum of audio. I want everyone to understand that this is a different circumstance. This is a case where there's audio frequency modulation, a vibration that takes place from one animal to another, either through the ground or through water like whales do, compared to necromancy, divination. This remote viewing, even though people do it, there is validity to it, but it is still a type that we are not to ever engage in. Now, I think what's interesting about these particular creatures, the Sasquatches, they appear to be able to do both. That's what makes them so unique. So when you mentioned the crackling, did he also mention that maybe there was a corona smell in the air at all, like an electrical smell?
He had mentioned that he was hoping and questioning himself that he thought it might be an electrical disturbance, as if there was going to be a lightning strike or things like that. But on his hike that day, he did not hear thunder at all, and he didn't get any or see any lightning whatsoever on his entire journey. There was nothing there.
Again, I think that goes along with the portal Stargate. Is there some areas that are more active than others, that you hear more from, like the area you're in versus Alaska or Africa or Australia?
I would imagine, it's not something that I looked into in-depthly because of the fact that I was concentrating mainly on what we've dealt with in our region, maybe say Canada, United States, a lot of activity, but mostly because of the population and population centers. On the British Columbia issue, real quick, is that there was a lot of things that had gone on in the Princeton region. I found out that the species, or whatever it was, would be in that region visibly for at least 125 years. First Nations people mentioned it. Pioneers documented it. There was an individual, Susan Allison. She would have been a pioneer in the 1800s. She would do her journey with her husband in 1869. And as they went across into the Princeton region from Hope, British Columbia, she had First Nations scouts or people that led her through, and they would tell her stories. She'd ultimately end up writing her which are famous, her memoirs of British Columbia. and she has, I think, 5 pages on what she called the big men of the mountains. I would, over time, I actually went to school with some of her great-great-great-grandchildren and discussed things with one of the ladies that are ultimately part of the family. But the ironic thing is that what she discussed and where they built their homestead on Allison Flats, named after them, was the actual place that we sighted the creature in 1974. If they would only known that they actually had the homestead right on the area, and our 2 sightings took place right there, right across the road.
Do you know of any fatalities, any killings of these particular creatures that have been identified that definitely a human was slaughtered by them?
Yeah, that's scientific community would like you to believe, and I would like to believe it as well, is that they're nonviolent, and that's not, that's what we saw. We saw a shy, timid creature that just wanted to get away from us and mankind. I've heard stories. I don't get into it too much because there's so much out there. But I have to say, though, that my first interview, it's actually a cassette interview, if you can believe that, would involve a fellow in British Columbia. He's actually from the area that we've had our sightings. I'd find him over time. I would find out. I wanted to know what happened to him because I don't think that his injuries that he received years ago, and I think it was the 1980s. I wanted to believe that he had just had a logging accident, but something wasn't jiving because the way the investigation was, and there was lack of RCMP involvement, which would be Canada's Royal Canadian Mounted Police, things like that. And I would ultimately contact the fellow and interview him, and then I did a credibility check. I did a breakdown on him entirely because, to me, if he was logging on a contract in the Passatin Valley near the U.S.-Canadian border in the 1980s, and because this is such a touchy, controversial subject, individuals in logging, fishing, mining, different things like that, a lot of times they're told to hush up, be quiet, because of credibility issues, but also your job. If they get wind that there's a species out there that needs migration routes or needs things like that, they shut down forests and do this and that. These type of fellows, a lot of times, manly, will just clam up and they just do their job. Now, over time, I would find that he was contracting in that region, and I'd find out, break the story on him, and the fellow, he said, over time, these creatures would be around, let's say, on an average of every second day. There'd be a number of them, and then there'd be this and this, just like family. But the logger would log, and they would wander around. Now, he stated to me that he felt that they didn't like them there, of course, because of the noise and taking down trees, everything. But long story short is the one day there was a group of 5, he stated, and 3 were male, there was a female, and then there was what he called the baby. And one day, because of all the days that they were together over the years or over whatever time span, they would get too close to each other, and he would drop a tree on what he thought was the smallest of the bunch. Now, he just waited to see what was going to happen. The female went into a shrill or a scream that would ultimately go through his bones, but also set off the 3 males. And he was instantly attacked and hit over the head from all he remembers. Now, they would put him on life support in, I think it was Penticton, BC, and he was there, and they didn't know whether he was going to survive. It would affect him for the rest of his life, and he had to retire and not work, and he's had health issues. But the issue is, I had talked to a Montana investigator, and I wanted to know if the creatures were just violent or based on violent, and we agreed, because that's what I felt ultimately as well, is he was attacked just based on a defensive posture and set off by the female. His co-workers would ultimately, they weren't there at the time, I don't know where they were at the moment, but they would drag him out of the woods, and then over time, as I said over the years, I'd free that story, and it'll be in my book project when it comes out. And so it seems that when the creature gets involved or when the species does things, it does it in a defensive posture only, and that would be based on only it being an animal or primate protecting whatever avenue it has to do to survive. That seemed to be the issue. But yet, when I talked to a few individuals in the southern states concerning a violent Sasquatch or Bigfoot or that type of creature, they are and do supposedly exist, and it would be something like a red-haired Sasquatch, or I haven't looked into it, 100%, because that's not what I was doing, but supposedly these could be cannibal, and there was a number of things going on. There's actually an individual that will be in the project, and she is a Choctaw a Native American, and she has supposedly, and I interviewed her, and she supposedly has been bred into her particular tribe to look after a group of forest giants or giants, and that's what she's designed to do.
Yeah, you mentioned red hair. I know that some of the grave sites that have been found, like the Kennewick Man, that these have had red hair, so I think there is a connection with that. We're getting down to the last 20 minutes. Some of the people that I've talked to over the past months and even ministered over the years that have had to do with the military over in Afghanistan and Iraq have also stated have seen these particular creatures on the battlefield, and they were never the same. They were even dealing with demonic entities that would appear on the battlefield. Have you run into that at all with returning vets?
I just started to touch base with not so much the military individuals, but maybe, like, say, a few folks that worked up high in the U.S. government, and because of what they were dealing with concerning that, what we discussed earlier, remote viewing, they actually exchanged places with the Russians and sent over a few of their individuals and vice versa. But that was not so much based on like, say, the subjects we're talking about. It was based on military type situations and that kind of thing.
I would think, as you mentioned, with all the cameras and everything else and the sightings, that there would be a lot more information out there. So I think that there's been a effort, very much like the Smithsonian Institute, that has been covering up the Nephilim, the giant grave sites and so forth, with the American Indians that had to deal with them. So I'm sure that I guess my question is, have you been approached by, let's say, the Men in Black or anything like that to stay away or not to go into a certain area?
Not personally, but if you go to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's site, the FBI site, you can pull files out of their documentation there that will show a few stories or things based on cattle mutilations and things that happened in the past. There was actually, I think it was Nebraska, where individuals were saying that they had seen an upright being, what they called a bear, but there was no way that it could be, because of how it was reacting. But the fellow that contacted me, or the individuals in the family, had stated that the fellow felt that even though the cattle mutilations and creatures that were being destroyed, or what was going on in those years, it wasn't so much that whatever that creature was involved with the activity as it was coming for feeding. So that was an issue with that. But then there was quite a bit of UFO activity in those years, and that came up. And I looked into it a little bit. There's been individuals that have stated that with the strangeness and how they started, I've talked to them over the years, and they said, Glenn, they'll be in the book project, and they said, look, we're flesh and blood individuals. The creature's an 8-foot or whatever giant, and just undiscovered. But over the years, when they contacted me, they said, no, we've changed our idea of it entirely, and it's now a paranormal issue. And whether they are being addressed from other avenues, but some of them are being visited by different things. So it's intense, and it's not my field, as same with the ufology end of it. But Sasquatch, Bigfoot's closing on that area quite a bit now.
Yeah, as we move closer towards the events that are happening here in the United States, with the way the government is just literally turning on the people, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. The Book of Revelation is very specific about these events that will take place on the earth, and I believe that these particular creatures, along with demons themselves, are going to be released to a point that'll be absolutely maddening. When I was still in Arizona back in the 80s, I was coming out of an area called Houston Mesa. It was just south of an Indian ruins. In fact, it's one of the oldest ones known. And the road we were on, we had to stop because in the middle of the road was a very large a pile of flesh. And it was probably 6-7 feet in diameter, stood 3 feet tall. It literally looked like it was a cow or a elk or something that had been turned inside out. And it was completely round. That's what didn't make any sense. But there was no head, no tail, and you could tell that it was flesh. You could look through into it, see the veins, and there was a little bit of blood around. It made absolutely no sense as to what it was. And we were coming back from a hiking tour, and the gentleman that was with me, we just literally looked at each other and said, we don't want anything to do with this. And we went ahead and moved on. So I don't know whatever happened to it. I don't know what that was. But I would think that if it was a killing, if it was something to do with cattle mutilation, whatever it was, the way that it was turned inside out or whatever the skinning process was, man himself couldn't have done that. So have you ever heard of anything like that?
Just locally here, I ran into situations. There was questions brought up. I did a 42-page booklet in the past on occult activity, as an example, in the Calgary region, because the churches here, a lot of them were saying that this wasn't going on. I would prove different with pictures I found of organizations that were operating out of the Calgary area in satanic atmospheres, and I would actually be pointed out by a City of Calgary foreman that I knew, and he said, Glenn, we're told to go and investigate or to clean this up, but we want you to see it first because I know you, and I'd like you to go out and check the site. It's in the city's southeast on the outskirts, and I would check it out. And I wasn't disappointed because I found, like manly-wise, I found shell casings to semi-automatic weapons, things like that. I also found an inverted cross, satanic star, and then they said they had to remove, ultimately, the mutilations that were there. But upon what I addressed and what I found is that the organs of different types were surgically removed, and to me, if that was just a bunch of kids or just an ordinary cult organization doing their thing, they wouldn't have that kind of expertise. That's what I was fascinated by. Was the fact is that you can burn a few crosses and you can do a few things. But how this was addressed, and the foreman had even mentioned to me, because I work for the city, and he said, Glenn, he says, it was like it was different. He says, we come across animal kills. I mean, even our crews have to go pick up and deal with dead animals all the time. But this kind of thing was different, and then I found out that in this region, at that time, many years ago, there was over 25 organizations operating out of the Calgary area, and that was one thing. I'm finding now, and this is the danger, because I actually have a warning in my book when it comes out, is that I'm noticing that whether it's the ufology issue or researchers, investigators, I'm starting to find in ours as well that some of them are affected by whatever means, and I'm starting to see, let's just say, a glaze over their eyes where there's something definitely wrong with them, because I'm seeing them turn. I'm seeing a metamorphosis of sorts, and they're not normal, and I know some of them have stepped into boundaries of the occult or avenues of shamanism or different things that they're trying to find a Bigfoot at all costs, and they're willing to play the cards to address that. Now, that's another red flag for me because of that background again, and it all comes down to what I was discussing earlier, is that I have something to explain in that book, because the fact is of what we saw. I have to base things on what I've seen, and then the gray area, and then what's happening these days. And in these days, we're going well off the path of righteousness. I can see it.
Yeah, and I mentioned about those who do the paranormal investigations. Many of them are infected. If we were to track the ones that have already done some of these shows, I think you'll find that their life is completely turned upside down. Have you heard any the law enforcement or past military people that have the weapons that they would use against such things? We had talked about what has been brought up is using copper or a particular type of round that seems to be more effective against these particular creatures in Afghanistan and Iraq. That copper, whether it's 50 caliber or 12 gauge type slug, and in my spirit and what I think that is correct. In fact, I myself have been stocking up on that for 12 gauge in case the certain circumstances come around here. I know that it will happen in time, so I'm just making sure that I'm prepared for it. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say concerning that. It's a touchy issue, and we start to get into I don't know. We start to get into the science fiction end of it. It's just not anywhere near what we've addressed in the past. And I've heard, and you hear stories, and there's different things. It's the what is it? The silver bullet for the werewolf, all that. Ultimately, the spiritual realm, I believe, doesn't give two shakes about that type of thing, because they move freely. But see, with the Bigfoot, and as you and I discussed in another conversation, was that if the Bigfoot still exists, there is the remote chance that spiritual forces give it the knowledge to escape. If it's not something as bizarre as that, then it could be that the Bigfoot no longer did exist, and now is extinct, and these spiritual forces have taken over the phenomena. But see, then we get into the real heavy end of it, and that's something that ultimately I'm not addressing, because I've pretty well been told and have sort of halted things at the moment concerning postponing book material because of that fact. It's so controversial and so intense, and the world has a hard time with that kind of thing, even though others and paranormal researchers are getting so much leeway concerning telepathic communications and being shown what the Sasquatch is all about and things like that. So it's intense one way, but then other areas we're getting like absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, some of the information have been on types of Nephilim hybrids or so forth that the military's dealt with. I myself, I've got no problem with the blood of Jesus and then sending one down range just in case. We're getting down to the last of it here. If someone has some information to pass along or would like to contact you, are you open to that, or should they contact me and then I'll connect you, or how would you like to do that?
No, I'm free and open to receive the information. So that, I mean, I know how busy you are, so it's either or. But they can contact me through my email. It's fine.
Okay. Would you like to give that out?
Yeah, it's Glen Glen .Boulier. It's Boulier at Shaw SHAW.ca.
Okay, great. So I guess the last question I have here, evidence. Has there been hair found, fingernails, even remnants of body parts of these things? Are you aware of that at all?
I sure am. I try not to get involved, as I said, with the mainstream issues. There's a lot of real struggles along that avenue, and there's a lot of hatred and different things going on. There was some supposed DNA samples concerning hair and other issues. The bodies never materialize, of course, and that's another reason that when I talk to the Native Americans, they say you can't find a body because they're retrieved. The extraterrestrial and Sasquatch brothers remove what they need to, and you won't find a body. DNA instances, there's been hair, there's been other things. It's something that I don't follow because I'm sort of like in the shadows, and I don't get involved with much of it because there's no concern of it for me, because all I've tried to explain is what's happening roughly, and then what we've dealt with in the past. That was the key issues.
If someone were to come across one of these, what would be your recommendation?
Would that be dead or alive?
Well, alive.
Okay. Yeah, just I'd say you just get to try to get to an organization. There's a number of them, but I won't mention names only because is that sometimes there's running evidence that they're not doing things properly, or it's touch and go in a lot of them, and that's the problem that the public's going to have, is to try to locate individuals that are legit or are truly concerned. There's I would say, stay away from the paranormal issues and try to find scientific researchers that are low profile, but yet filing and addressing things, and then they'll put it away. I will say, though, that John Green in the past, which is one of the researchers that has done an awesome job on things in the past, documenting as well as investigating, although I don't think he's ever seen the creature itself. And it's those kind of fellows or ladies that you want to drop the information to so that they can build a better data process or a better area for that. But as I'd mentioned, is that we're at a point where a lot of it doesn't matter anymore because of where this is all headed.
I agree with you. Well, I want to thank you for coming on. It's been very inspiring and a lot of information. So I'd like to do this again and follow up because I know there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to be emailed to both of us, and maybe we can continue again. And then when your book is ready, too, I'd like to help you promote that. So does that
Sure.
Would that work for you?
Yeah, that'd be excellent. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, Glenn, again, thank you, and we will have you back on again, and I'll probably talk to you within the next couple of days.
Okay, thanks kindly, Scott.
All right, good night.
Yeah, good night.
You're listening to the all-new KBLU Radio Network. That's the Blue Raven Network. Often duplicated, but never replicated. You're listening to the all-new KBLU Radio Network. That's the Blue Raven Network.
Often duplicated, never replicated. You're listening to the all-new KBLU Radio Network, Blue Raven Network.